Why venting anger hurts more than it helps, a deep dive into philosophy. Imagine this: you're standing in a room, heart racing, voice raised, arms flailing as you let every ounce of your anger spill out. You feel powerful, liberated even. You finally let it out. But hours later, when the dust settles, a strange emptiness creeps in. Not peace, not clarity, just more agitation, maybe even regret. We're told that venting anger is healthy, that expressing it is better than bottling it up. But what if that's a myth? What if venting this act that feels so cathartic in the moment is actually rewiring our minds in ways that make us more angry, more reactive, more fragile? And what if the ancient philosophers already warned us of this long ago? This isn't just a psychological idea. It's deeply philosophical. Because to understand anger is to confront one of the oldest questions in the human condition: what do we do with our pain? Do we express it, suppress it, or transcend it? The Stoics, for example, viewed anger as a failure of reason, a temporary madness that clouds judgment and distorts reality. Seneca, in his treatise on anger, warned that indulging our rage doesn't release it, but reinforces it. The best remedy for anger, he wrote, is delay. Why? Because anger, when acted upon, tends to grow legs. It spreads. It teaches us to become the kind of person who needs to explode in order to feel heard. And that's not liberation, that's dependence. So let's break this down. When we vent, we believe we are purging something toxic, like draining poison from a wound. But what if it's not poison we're draining, but fuel we're adding? Modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies have shown that venting, especially through aggressive outlets, doesn't decrease anger. It strengthens the neural pathways associated with aggression. It trains the brain to associate relief with expression through force. So the more you yell, the more you need to yell. The more you punch the pillow, the more normalized that reaction becomes. And over time, you're not just someone who gets angry, you become someone who relies on anger to feel powerful, to feel alive, to feel real. But why does it feel good in the moment then? Why does yelling, throwing something, or slamming the door seem to give us that energetic release? That's the trap. Anger, like fire, gives off warmth. It can feel like power. But it's a consuming kind of power. It burns through your relationships, your peace, your clarity of mind. And the warmth doesn't last. What remains is ash. And often, the damage we cause in those heated moments cannot be undone with a simple apology.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Here's where the philosophical lens becomes crucial. If we look at anger merely as a behavioral issue, something to let out or manage, we miss the deeper truth. Anger is not just an emotion. It is a signal, a messenger. It tells us that something we value feels threatened. But the question is, do we want to listen to the message or become the explosion? When you constantly vent, you stop hearing what anger is trying to tell you. You become consumed by its noise. But if you pause, if you sit with it, if you study it, you begin to see its source. And often, what we find is not strength, but fear, not power, but pain. Let me ask you something deeply honest. When was the last time your anger truly solved anything? Not just silenced someone, not just made you feel right, but actually brought peace, understanding, or growth. In most cases, anger doesn't solve, it silences. It wins arguments but loses people. It gives us control in the moment, but often at the cost of long-term connection and clarity. Now, I'm not saying we should suppress anger. That's the other trap. Bottling it up, pretending we're not hurt, denying our frustration that creates a pressure cooker inside our soul. Eventually, it explodes in ways we can't control. But between suppression and venting, there is a third path, the path of reflection, the path of transmutation, the path of philosophical engagement with our emotions. What if, instead of venting, we sat with our anger like a teacher? What if we interrogated it, asked it, what are you trying to protect? What wound are you guarding? What fear are you hiding? That questioning doesn't diminish the anger, it dignifies it. It turns it from a weapon into a window, and through that window, we begin to see ourselves more clearly. This is what thinkers like Marcus Aurelius practiced. He didn't shout at the world. He wrote to himself. His meditations are full of moments where he wrestles with anger, not by unleashing it, but by understanding it. He asked himself constantly, what good is my rage? What does it cost me? What kind of man do I become when I let it rule me? These aren't just rhetorical questions. They're invitations. They invite us to take ownership not just of our actions, but of our inner world. So here's the challenge. What would it look like if, the next time you felt that boiling heat rise inside you, you didn't vent, but listened? What if you gave that moment just enough space to breathe, to cool, to teach you something? What kind of power might you discover not in the release, but in the restraint? Because maybe the greatest strength isn't in expressing every emotion we feel. Maybe it's in mastering them not through denial, but through awareness. Anger feels like power, but it's a prison, the hidden cost of emotional release. There's a reason anger feels so seductive, it mimics power. In the heat of the moment, when your voice rises and your fists clench, when your chest pounds and the world narrows to one burning point of injustice, you feel alive. You feel righteous. You feel like the force of your emotion is proof that you matter. But here's the deception. Anger offers the feeling of power, not the substance. It tricks us into believing that emotional release is the same thing as resolution. But it's not. It's a trap. And the more you rely on anger to assert your presence, the more you imprison yourself in a reactive identity. Let's take a step back and ask something difficult. Why do we need anger to feel powerful in the first place? What have we internalized about our worth, our voice, our agency, that makes us believe we must erupt to be heard? That we must lash out to be respected? That we must vent to be real? These are not just emotional habits, they're philosophical assumptions. Philosophers like Epictetus and the Buddha both warned us about this centuries ago. Anger, they said, is not strength. It's a loss of control. It's the mind surrendering to the passions. And when we surrender to anger repeatedly, we become slaves to external events, to our wounded egos, to every perceived slight we interpret as a threat. And yet we glorify venting. We say things like, I just needed to let it out, or at least I was honest. But brutal honesty without compassion is just brutality. And letting it out without reflection is not healing, it's rehearsal. Rehearsing the same narrative of victimhood, rehearsing the same identity of someone who can't be crossed, rehearsing the belief that anger is the only tool we have to push back against the chaos of life. But what if that belief is keeping us small? What if the more we vent, the more we reinforce a self-image that is reactive, volatile, and ultimately fragile? Let me offer a metaphor. Think of your mind as a garden. Emotions are seeds. When you vent anger, it might feel like pulling a weed from the surface. But if you do it violently, without understanding the root, you actually shake the soil loose. You make it easier for that weed to grow back. And often you scatter the seeds of more weeds in the process. But if, instead, you kneel down and study what kind of weed this is, where it came from, how deep it runs, you begin to cultivate wisdom. You learn how to uproot without damaging. You learn how to plant something better in its place. But here's the hardest part: that kind of work is slow. It's not flashy. It doesn't provide the instant gratification that venting does. And that's why it's so rare. Because we're addicted to immediacy. We want the emotional high that comes from a dramatic release. But real power, the kind that transforms not just our mood, but our life, comes from patience, from self-awareness, from discipline. And that's where philosophy steps in. Philosophy isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about refining it. It's about turning raw experience into insight and insight into action. Ask yourself this: what kind of person do I become when I vent my anger regularly? Do I become more centered, more compassionate, more wise? Or do I become more reactive, more brittle, more consumed by things I cannot control? These are not small questions. They're questions that shape your life. Because your habits of emotion are not just responses, they are acts of creation. With every outburst, you are creating a self. With every restraint, you are shaping a different self. Which one do you want to be? Let's also not ignore the social cost. When we vent anger, we often justify it by saying we're just being real. But what we forget is that realness without responsibility is chaos. Every time you erupt at someone, whether it's a partner, a child, a coworker, you teach them how safe or unsafe it is to be near your emotions. You shape the emotional climate of every space you enter. And over time, people stop listening, not because they don't care, but because they've learned that your emotional fire burns everything in its path. But what if you could be heard without burning? What if you could be powerful without being destructive? That's the path of the wise. It's also the path of the rare. But because it requires you to feel fully without reacting blindly. It requires you to hold space for your own anger without needing to throw it like a weapon. It requires you to become the kind of person who doesn't just express pain, but transforms it. That's not weakness. That's mastery. The quiet alchemy. The quiet alchemy. Well, how transforming anger leads to inner freedom and emotional intelligence. There's a kind of alchemy that very few people talk about, not the turning of lead into gold, but the internal transformation of anger into awareness, clarity, and peace. It's quiet, often invisible to the outside world, and yet it is one of the most powerful acts a human being can perform. Because when you feel that familiar ignition, that heat rising in your chest, that tightening in your throat, that mental justification for why you're right and someone else is wrong, you're standing at a crossroads. One path leads to the habitual, venting, reacting, escalating. The other leads inward, toward reflection, toward stillness, and ultimately toward a kind of freedom that can't be shaken by external events. That's the path of emotional intelligence. Not suppressing the anger, but transforming it into something useful, something wise. Emotional intelligence is often misunderstood. People think it means being nice, smiling through pain, or avoiding conflict. But real emotional intelligence is fierce. It's the capacity to hold your full emotional experience without being ruled by it. It's the strength to stand inside the storm of your own feelings and not get swept away. And anger is the perfect test, because anger is loud. It demands to be heard. It makes you feel like if you don't act now, if you don't say something, do something, you'll be betraying yourself. But that's the illusion. Anger pretends it's about justice, but often it's about ego. It tells you you're defending a principle, but underneath, you're often defending a wound. And this is where the alchemy begins, when you can slow down enough to ask, what is this anger really about? Not just the surface story, what they said, what they did, but the deeper layer. What fear is being triggered? What need is going unmet? What story about yourself is being threatened? These questions cut through the noise. They force you to move from reaction to reflection. And in that shift, you begin to reclaim your power, not the power to dominate, but the power to choose your response. One of the most profound realizations we can have is this: emotions are not problems to be solved. They are processes to be understood. The anger, like all emotions, has intelligence. It arises for a reason. But if we only ever express it outwardly, we miss the chance to learn from it. We treat it like a fire to be thrown instead of a signal to be studied. And so we repeat the same cycles. We get angry, we vent, we feel temporary relief, and then the pattern returns, over and over, until one day we either wake up or we burn out. To wake up means to stop asking, how do I get rid of my anger? And start asking, how do I grow through it? That's the deeper question, because anger can be a teacher. It can show you where your boundaries have been violated, where your values are under threat, where your inner child is crying out for attention. But only if you're willing to sit with it. Only if you're willing to listen. Only if you're willing to feel the full wave without needing to crash it into someone else. This is what inner freedom looks like. It's not about becoming emotionless. It's about no longer being enslaved by your emotions. It's about cultivating the kind of awareness that allows you to feel everything: rage, grief, frustration, and still choose your words, your actions, your energy. That's real liberation, because now the world doesn't control you. Your boss doesn't control you. Your past doesn't control you. You have a center that cannot be shaken because it's rooted in understanding, not in reaction. So here's the invitation. The next time you feel anger arise, don't rush to fix it, explain it, or express it. Pause. Breathe. Observe. Ask it what it wants to teach you. Then act not from the heat of the moment, but from the clarity that comes after the fire has cooled. That's the quiet alchemy. That's the transformation that no one sees, but everyone around you feels. And it's how you stop being a prisoner of your emotions and become their master. The final flame, why mastering anger is the beginning of true wisdom and human connection at the end of all this. Beneath the neuroscience, beyond the philosophy, is past the social consequences and psychological traps, lies something even deeper: the human heart's need to be understood. And anger, for all its intensity, is just one of the many ways that need tries to express itself. But here's the paradox: when we use anger to demand understanding, we often destroy the very bridge needed to receive it. We push people away with the force of our emotions, hoping they will hear and help us, only to find ourselves more isolated than before. The truth is, mastering anger isn't just about personal peace. It's about connection. It's about building a life where your emotional world serves your relationships instead of sabotaging them. Think about the people you trust most. Are they the ones who explode at every inconvenience, who wear their anger like armor, who make you feel like you're walking on eggshells? Or are they the ones who can hold space for your emotions, even when they have their own? The ones who can feel deeply but remain grounded, who can say, "I'm upset," without turning it into a weapon. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. And it's the kind of wisdom that builds trust, intimacy, and real human connection. When we master anger, we gain more than control over our tempers. We gain access to a deeper layer of life, one where conversations become more honest, where conflicts become opportunities for growth, where emotions become bridges instead of barriers. And the irony is, this kind of mastery doesn't make us less emotional. It makes us more emotionally available. Because we're no longer reacting from our wounds, we're responding from our wholeness. And what does that do to the people around us? It gives them permission to do the same. When you hold your anger with grace, you model what emotional maturity looks like. You show others that they, too, can pause, reflect, and choose a better path. And slowly, the world around you begins to shift. Not because you've forced it to change, but because you've changed your relationship with yourself. So here's the final question I leave you with, and it's one that could change the course of your life. What kind of world are you building with the way you handle your anger? Is it a world filled with fear, volatility, and distance? Or is it a world built on patience, clarity, and connection? Because in the end, the way we handle anger is the way we handle life. Do we rush to judgment, or do we seek understanding? Do we act from impulse or from insight? Do we burn bridges or build them? You don't need to vent to be free. You don't need to explode to be heard. You just need to learn how to listen first to yourself, then to others. That's where mastery begins. And that's how the fire of anger becomes the light of wisdom. Let it burn, but let it illuminate, not incinerate.